Hello everyone, and welcome to the first presentation for Western Civilization 2. I'm Ryan P. Johnson. Some of you may be familiar with my work from my Western Civilization 1 presentations. If you are, you'll find that these presentations are very similar to the others I've uploaded here on my YouTube channel. If you're a new visitor, either because you're a current student of mine or you simply came across this video by happenstance, get ready for some history goodness. Whatever brought you here, I'd really appreciate it if you would take a moment to subscribe to my channel and let your friends and family know about this channel so that they can subscribe as well. If you're a current student in one of my courses, in the Enlightenment module in our course LMS, there is a quiz that accompanies this video. Please access that quiz in another tab now and follow along with the presentation, answering quiz questions as we proceed through our look at the Enlightenment. Our material for Western Civilization 2 begins with the Enlightenment. The stars of the Enlightenment were the philosophs, the French term for philosophers. Not all of the scholars who contributed to the Enlightenment were actual philosophers, though. Most were journalists, lawyers, and professors. Also, despite the fact that we use a French term to describe the group of Enlightenment scholars as a whole, not all were French. Philosophs came from England, Scotland, the German lands, the Italian peninsula, Switzerland, North America, and yes, France. Despite this diversity, it was French culture that dominated, as Paris was the center of Enlightenment thinking, and many of the most well-known philosophers were indeed French and had great influence on other scholars. Most philosophers came from the upper and middle classes of society, from families that had enough resources to provide their children with education. In his work, The Enlightenment, A Beginner's Guide, historian Kieran O'Hara argues that one of the 6 main themes or aspects of the Enlightenment movement was that it was the project of an educated minority. A relatively small number of men and women contributed to the movement, and very few of them came from humble means. What the philosophers wanted to do was apply philosophy and reason to the problems faced by society. Rather than employ philosophy to create broad new ways of thinking, they wanted to target more specific aspects of their societies that they believed did not function as well as they should. We can, however, tease out some general themes that cut across numerous Enlightenment thinkers. Kieran O'Hara has argued, as mentioned a moment ago, that there were 6 main aspects of the Enlightenment as a movement. We've already seen one of the 6, that the movement was propelled by a small minority of educated thinkers. The first aspect that O'Hara gets to is new sources of authority, meaning Enlightenment thinkers paid much less attention to what older, more traditional authorities like the Catholic Church, the monarch, and the aristocracy said. In their place, the philosophers valued reason, observation, experimentation, logic, and rationality. Second, there was a newfound confidence and optimism. Many philosophers were confident in the ability of individual human beings to learn and grow. That confidence in individuals led to optimism about the future of the human species. For if individual human beings could improve themselves, that would only work to the betterment of the species as a whole, allowing humanity to achieve things never before dreamt of. Third, that confidence and optimism was balanced with a healthy dose of skepticism. In the early Enlightenment, that skepticism was reserved for the old authorities. Scholars began to doubt the veracity and wisdom of the church, the king, and the nobility. As the Enlightenment progressed, though, later thinkers became skeptical of earlier philosophers. The next aspect O'Hara brings up is universal reason. Reason was the chief buzzword of the Enlightenment, the primary concept referred to by many philosophers. Reason was believed to be something everyone had or could do, hence its universality. There were also certain truths that scholars believed were universal, such as the best ways to organize a society, or the most effective economic system, or the rules behind the best sort of government to employ. If everyone had the capacity to reason, and certain truths were in fact true regardless of who was looking at them, then everyone could understand those truths and agree on them. The fifth aspect from O'Hara is the idea of enlightened self-interest. We've touched on this one a bit with a previous aspect, the one on confidence and optimism, but let's explain it more fully here. According to this idea, people would use their reason to determine what things would be good not just for them, but for their community as well. Once they've determined what those things are, they'd seek them out. If everyone in a community was doing things that benefited themselves and their larger society, not only would they improve as an individual, but their community would improve as well. Therefore, self-interest, or seeking after what you want, is a good thing, as long as it's enlightened, or as long as what you want would benefit your community in some way, shape, or form. We've already seen the sixth and final aspect of the Enlightenment, that the movement was driven by a small number of educated people. It was not a grassroots, bottom-up, widespread development. Now that we've established what the philosophs were doing and thinking about, let's zoom in a bit and focus on a few of the biggest names that emerged from the Enlightenment. Baron Montesquieu was a French noble who was trained in the law. His name was not Baron, that was his title, reflecting his noble status. In 1721, he published a book called The Persian Letters, which was a satire of French society told through the lens of two fictional Persians visiting the country. Montesquieu used these characters as a means of making real critiques of French society and government that would be dangerous for him to make directly. In 1748, he published his most famous work, The Spirit of the Laws. In this book, he attempted what he believed was a scientific study of different peoples and laws. His overall argument was that certain groups of people needed one form of government, while a different group needed an entirely different type of government. For example, he claimed that republics work only for societies that have small populations. Monarchy would be a better form of government for larger states, while for the largest political entities, empires, despotism was the most appropriate type of government. In addition, the spirit of the laws gets at an important political concept, one that would be quite influential among philosophers in both Europe and the soon-to-be 13 states that would make up the original United States of America. Montesquieu talks at length about the separation of powers, and how not keeping the various powers of government, that is, the legislative, executive, and judicial powers, separate, leads to the end of liberty and the rise of tyranny. Another important philosopher, in fact one of the towering figures of the Enlightenment, was Voltaire. Born into an upper-middle-class family and given a Jesuit education, Voltaire would become a well-known writer. His skewering of a powerful noble, however, forced him into voluntary exile for 2 years, which he spent in England. He was impressed by the amount of religious toleration there and would continue to attack religious intolerance for the rest of his life. Once Voltaire settled back in France, he continued to write and to focus on fighting against intolerance. In 1763, he composed a treatise on toleration and argued that Europeans should not only treat other Europeans like family, but should also consider men and women across the globe as brothers and sisters. He also used allegories to argue against what he believed were dangerous teachings and superstitions, not just from the Catholic Church, but from all institutionalized religions. A matter of debate in historical circles is Voltaire's own religious beliefs. Some have argued that Voltaire was an atheist who rejected the existence of any type of deity or God. Others have posited that Voltaire was, like many of the philosophs, a deist, meaning he believed in some sort of higher power, but held that that higher power does not concern itself with the everyday affairs of human beings. Denis Diderot was another Frenchman who made important contributions to the Enlightenment. His most famous project was the Encyclopédie, or the Encyclopedia, consisting of 28 volumes, including 11 volumes of illustrations. Diderot's encyclopedia, however, was not like modern ones, in which objective descriptions of terms and concepts are presented. Rather, Diderot's work had a clear agenda, that being to compile Enlightenment thought in order to begin changing the way people thought about the world. Many philosophs, including Diderot, contributed articles that advocated for social, political, and religious change. Many articles also criticized current arrangements and authorities. After the encyclopedia had gone through a few editions, the price was lowered, putting the wealth of knowledge within reach of many more people. One of the other towering figures of the Enlightenment was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Born in Switzerland, Rousseau traveled Europe and held many odd jobs before studying music and the classics. In his work Discourse on the Origins of Inequality in Mankind, he argued that in a state of nature, man is free, unencumbered by laws and rules. However, some people began to claim private ownership of property, which led to rules and regulations meant to protect that ownership. Government and its various officials were thus born in order to create and enforce those rules and regulations. Rousseau held that humans simply could not go back to living in a state of nature. Civil society was here to stay. In 1762, Rousseau wrote one of his most famous works, The Social Contract. In it, he attempted to reconcile individual freedom with the need to follow rules in order to live together in society. He argued that laws are made by people through discussion and debate, and ultimately through compromise to work out differences of opinion. This way, the laws of a society would reflect what Rousseau called the general will, or the combined interests of everyone in the society who had a hand in creating those laws. By taking an active role in the process, people took ownership of the laws and therefore had a vested interest in maintaining them. The role of government, according to Rousseau, was to simply act as an intermediary between the people and the laws. Government could not make any rules or laws on its own. Only the people could do that. Furthermore, government officials could not serve as representatives for the people, dispatched to make decisions that people did not want to make. No, argued Rousseau, every decision had to be made by the people, essentially creating a system of direct, participatory democracy. The same year that saw the publication of The Social Contract also saw the release of Emile, in which Rousseau argued that education should inspire children and foster their natural inclinations. He held that reason and emotion should balance each other, that the mind and the heart were both needed for a person to be complete, a sentiment that presaged the development of Romanticism in the next century. Rousseau's views on women, however, were not as enlightened as some of his contemporaries. For centuries, men had controlled the conversation about the role of women in society. The prevailing idea of the day, one supported by Rousseau, was that women were biologically and therefore, quote, naturally, different from men and suited to different roles, such as childbirth and motherhood. This, in the minds of male writers, made women, quote, naturally inferior to men, not capable of the high-minded thinking it took to understand politics or economics. Rousseau himself argued that women needed soft, comfortable environments that suited their natural condition and allowed them to effectively care for and raise children. However, not all philosophers agreed with Rousseau. #not all philosophers. Both Diderot and Voltaire argued that men and women were not all that different, and that women were just as capable as men. Women like Mary Astell and Mary Wollstonecraft, philosophers in their own right, argued that women could and would benefit from education. Wollstonecraft also turned some Enlightenment arguments against male writers like Rousseau. She cleverly pointed out that if Rousseau believed arbitrary power exercised by governments and slave owners was wrong, which he did, it would be quite hypocritical of him to deny the injustice of arbitrary power exercised by men over women. Additionally, she held that if the Enlightenment principle of universal reason was true, then women also possessed reason and the ability to use it to find truth. If they have the ability to reason, she argued, there was no legitimate reason to deny women the same basic rights as men. Though philosophers came from different socioeconomic status, the appeal of Enlightenment ideas first spread among the aristocracy and the upper middle classes. Crucial to the spread of these ideas were book sales and salons. Salons were rooms in the homes of affluent people where gatherings of thinkers and scholars took place. Women such as Madame Geoffroy and Madame du Deffand played important roles as hosts and organizers. At these gatherings, ideas could be exchanged, questions asked, and theories tested and developed. Besides salons, libraries, reading clubs, and coffee houses were all hubs where Enlightenment ideas were read and discussed. In the realm of art, a new style called Rococo emerged in the early 1700s. This style focused on grace and gentleness, emphasizing curves and items like seashells and flowers. Neoclassicism was also still popular during the 18th century, focusing on themes of ancient Greece and Rome. Typical of neoclassical art was Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatii, depicting 3 Roman brothers swearing an oath to defend their country with their lives. Music also developed during this period of time, witnessing the emergence of the symphony, the sonata, the concerto, and more. In the Baroque era, from the late 17th to the middle of the 18th century, Johann Sebastian Bach and George Frederick Handel dominated the scene. By the second half of the 18th century, though, the classical era was beginning, with such luminaries as Franz Joseph Haydn and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart composing popular and influential operas. The 18th century also saw the development of the novel. Evolving from earlier types of stories from the Middle Ages, the novel became a popular form of storytelling, especially since, as a new genre, there were no formal rules holding back potential novelists, who could experiment with different ideas and ways of relating a tale. History continued the trend started during the Renaissance, see my presentation on the Renaissance for more information, of reducing the role of God and miracles and putting the focus on human responsibility for the events of the past. However, since some writers of history such as Voltaire and Edward Gibbon, author of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, were also philosophers, their approach to history had a specific goal. They wanted to show how their new ideas about society, government, and humanity were actually not new, but could be found in successful societies of the past. By contrast, those societies that did not do things the way the philosophers wanted suffered problems and collapsed. Secondary schools and universities during the Enlightenment mostly catered to the wealthy elite, whether aristocratic or middle class. Some Enlightenment thinkers actually supported the notion that education should perpetuate class divisions, as the goal of education was not to create upward social mobility and to chance at a better life, but to teach those who could afford an education how to either rule wisely if they were an aristocrat, or how to manage their business effectively if they were upper middle class. For the poor who could not get educated, their lot in life was to work hard and accept, well, their lot in life. Universities still focused on teaching the liberal arts that they had been teaching for centuries. Subjects like grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, and geometry made up the curriculum. However, as science and experimentation became more widespread and useful for society, demands were made for additional subjects to be taught, like physics, geography, languages, and bookkeeping. It should be noted here that there was a difference in the 18th century between the high and low cultures. The symphonies of Mozart, the benefits of education, the art of painters like David were enjoyed by the wealthy elites, those with the financial resources and leisure time to enjoy such pursuits. For the majority of Europeans, their spare time was spent enjoying forms of low culture, such as carnivals and religious holidays. Local taverns also provided a place where people could gather, gossip, exchange news, and unfortunately, drown their problems in drink. A growth in literacy rates among the lower classes also allowed reading to become a pastime of all classes. People of the lower class usually read short, simple stories called chapbooks, rather than more sophisticated novels. Change was also seen in the realm of religion. During the Reformation, see my presentation on the Reformation for more, Protestant churches generally welcomed state involvement as an organizing force. Martin Luther consciously avoided creating a religious hierarchy in his Reformed church because such a practice was too, quote, Catholic for him. So he needed secular or non-religious figures like princes to provide structure. During the 18th century, many nations, even Catholic ones, began extending the power of the state into the realm of church affairs, minimizing the role of the Pope and other high-ranking church officers, and transforming the church from an international, independent organization into a number of state-run churches. The repeated calls from Enlightenment thinkers for greater religious tolerance indicates that institutionalized religious organizations were still very intolerant. Louis XIV, the famous Sun King, tried to enforce religious conformity by revoking official toleration for French Calvinists called Huguenots. Jews were also still targets of discrimination and persecution, subject to heavy taxes, laws against free movement, and pogroms or state-sponsored organized assaults on Jewish communities. On a popular level, many Catholics focused on external things they could do to earn salvation, such as venerating saints and relics, going on pilgrimages, and doing good works. However, for some of the faithful of every church, Catholic or Protestant, this amounted to going through the motions, so to speak, and it left them feeling empty inside. Some, therefore, looked for a more emotionally fulfilling way to practice their faith. In both the German lands and England, new groups emerged looking to fill that need. In Germany, Nikolaus von Zinzendorf founded a new movement called the Moravian Brethren that stressed a personal relationship with God and mysticism, or the direct experience of oneness with God. Zinzendorf railed against what he termed, quote, rationalist approaches to God, arguing that trying to understand God through the rational mind was akin to atheism. In England, although there were groups that protested the official Anglican Church, such as the Puritans and the Quakers, those protests were quite mild. The lack of spiritual feeling led to the emergence of John Wesley and Methodism. Wesley was a minister in the Anglican Church who underwent a crisis of faith, resolved only by what he characterized as a mystical experience. Afterwards, he began preaching in a more emotional way, urging followers to seek out God with their hearts. He focused on preaching to the lowest classes of English society, those who were the most downtrodden and had the fewest opportunities. The Anglican Church was opposed to this type of preaching, which it labeled as superstitious and dangerous. So emotionally charged were some of Wesley's presentations that people experienced charged, even violent mystical experiences. Science played a major role in the origins of the Enlightenment. The scientific revolution of the 1500s and 1600s effectively laid the groundwork for some of the thinking of the 1700s. Isaac Newton not only developed calculus and the three laws of motion, he also posited an entirely new worldview. Newton's discoveries indicated that human beings could, in fact, come to understand the fundamental principles of how the universe operated. Anyone could possibly understand the inner workings of movement in the heavens. All you had to do was comprehend calculus. Easy, right? Right? All jokes aside, once it was established that the Earth we inhabit and the larger universe surrounding that planet worked according to a set of knowable rules, other thinkers began to wonder, if the very universe around us works according to basic rules, might government, economics, and society operate the same way? Are there fundamental rules behind what humans do and how human institutions behave that we can discover? These questions would lead many Enlightenment philosophers, including the ones mentioned earlier, to begin studying, analyzing, and theorizing about human beings and the societies in which they lived. Precursors to the Enlightenment, such as Bernard de Fontenelle and Pierre Bayle, also developed a healthy dose of skepticism, which, you'll recall, is one of the main aspects of the Enlightenment, particularly of the Catholic Church and its dogma and intolerance. Fontenelle came to believe that church resistance to the new scientific discoveries of Galileo and others made the church an enemy of science. Bayle, meanwhile, argued that forcing people to believe in a specific religion was wrong. People should be allowed to come to whatever set of religious beliefs suited them. To force religion upon individuals was hypocritical to what most religions preached, argued Bayle. You can clearly see a through line from Bayle to later thinkers like Voltaire. European exploration of the larger world also had an impact on the Enlightenment. Travel literature, that is, books and stories written about the faraway places Europeans visited, were eagerly read back home. Tales of exotic animals, stunning landscapes, and the customs of non-Europeans led to the contrast between man in a civil society, as in Europe, and man in a state of nature, as in not Europe, that was primitive, basic, unsophisticated. The flip side of that coin was that non-Europeans were also seen as untroubled by, quote, modern concerns that affected European minds and bodies. Hence the idea of the, quote, noble savage was born. A non-European living in the Pacific Island region or along the coast of Africa, unencumbered by thoughts of social contracts and religious toleration, but also too, quote, uncivilized to understand any of those concepts. In the late 1600s, John Locke argued that the human mind was a tabula rasa, or a blank slate, on which one's experiences and environment etch how one thinks about the world. If you could change experiences and environment, Locke argued, you could change how people thought and behaved. You can see how such ideas as this influenced many Enlightenment thinkers, including Denis Diderot, who wanted to use the encyclopedia to change the way people thought. You can also see the influence Locke had in the Enlightenment aspect of enlightened self-interest, which posited changing the way people thought to get them to seek out things beneficial to them and their larger community. During the Enlightenment, Newton's influence would lead philosophers across Europe to collectively begin studying the, quote, science of man, or the social sciences. More attention was paid to human behavior and psychology, as well as the, quote, science behind things like politics and economics. The physiocrats are considered the founders of modern economic study. Led by Francois Quesnay, the physiocrats believed that land was the only source of wealth, and that agriculture improved land and therefore increased wealth. Rejecting a focus on money as wealth, they argued that a single tax on landed property should make up the entirety of a nation's income. Contrary to the idea of mercantilism, which argued that a strictly controlled economy was needed for a nation to prosper, the physiocrats held that natural economic forces should be left to work themselves out, and that individuals should be allowed to seek after their own interest. By doing so, the entire society would benefit. This would be the seed for the economic idea of laissez-faire, laissez-passer. Let the people decide for themselves. Government need not interfere. The best expression of physiocratic thinking is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Wait. That's not right. That's Agent Smith. I want that guy. That's Adam Smith. Agent Smith is from The Matrix. Adam Smith is the economic thinker. In The Wealth of Nations, Smith proposed three main economic principles. First, tariffs on goods imported from other nations were wrong. Nations should buy products from others if they can't produce them as cheaply themselves. Second, rather than land as wealth, as the physiocrats proposed, Smith proposed that wealth was found in labor. The work done by a nation's artisans, merchants, and manual laborers constituted how wealthy it was. Finally, Smith held that government should play no role in the economic sphere, and that government should limit its activities to maintaining an army to protect the nation, to maintaining a police force to enforce the laws, and to maintain public infrastructure that even large companies could not afford to maintain. The principles of economic liberalism of the 19th century would spawn from Smith's principles. That wraps up our presentation on the Enlightenment. In this lesson, we explored philosophical and religious developments. We investigated the role of science in the Enlightenment. And finally, we looked briefly at economic ideas in the 18th century. If you have any questions about this presentation, please leave them in the comment section below, or if you are one of my current students, email me. I'd also appreciate it if you take a moment to subscribe to my channel and share this video with others you think would enjoy it. If you'd like to learn more about the Enlightenment, here's a list of books you can get from a library or a local bookstore that will help you out. Finally, if you're going to comment on this video, please do so respectfully. I really don't want to spend my time swatting down rude comments like they're murder hornets. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you all again soon.